Yes, I've had to switch computers because my other computers decided to do an upgrade.
Isn't that bloody annoying when that happens?
Yeah, and it says about 31 minutes until it's finished.
Oh, well.
So I thought, I haven't got 31 minutes.
Okay, do you think everyone's ready to go? Okay, lovely, good. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us on this lovely summer's evening. The publication of Simon Mayo's latest book, Knife Edge. I'm Cheryl from the Chorleywood and Gerrards Cross bookshops and would like to explain the format for this evening. The webinar will last approximately an hour with the opportunity for you, the audience, to ask questions towards the end. If you'd like to ask a question, please can you type it in using the chat button at the bottom of your screen. I will now hand you over to Barry Forshaw, the author of Crime Fiction, A Reader's Guide, and many other books on the subject. He is also the Financial Times crime critic. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Cheryl, and welcome everybody. I'm looking forward to this evening. In fact, I interviewed Simon a couple of weeks ago for a big piece in The Eye. The Eye was so impressed by this piece, presumably because of my writing rather than what Simon was saying, that they asked for it to be extended. And I had to add word count to it. So Simon, I don't really need to introduce him to you, but I'm going to anyway. Simon Mayo is a man of many parts. One of the country's best loved radio presenters. He has a dedicated following. And as an interviewer, which is my job tonight, he has a psychoanalyst's knack for bringing out even the most recalcitrant of personalities. And his interests as a disc jockey extend beyond popular music, as his successful stint at the classical radio station Scala, which I hope you're all listening to, has proved. And we're here tonight, though, for his book, Knife Edge, which is his new adult novel. He's written a popular YA trilogy, Itch, but Knife Edge is already being praised by a lot of people. Compellingly readable thriller with the likes of Lee Child lining up with compliments. So Simon, were you, you'd had success with your young adult series. Were you slightly apprehensive about how Knife Edge would be received?
Yes, the tense of that question is interesting because I still am very nervous as to how it will be received. It's publication day today, so which is the reason why I have a glass here. I don't normally do this at 7:30. Oh, cheers! Well, you know, absolutely mazel tov. But I'm very, very apprehensive always, and I think it's probably a very creative. I think it's right. Why wouldn't you? You know, what if I would imagine every writer ever, even if you've had 30 books out, would think, what if no one likes this one? You know, what if it's all about to end? You know, so I think apprehensive, yes, and continuing to be apprehensive for the foreseeable future.
Val McDermott said to me once that whenever she's been given some kind of award or recognition, she's waiting for the follow-up phone call in which somebody says, actually, it's not you, it's somebody else with talent, and you really are an imposter. And she's, yes. Val McDermott, who's top of the tree, is worried about being found out.
Yes, well, I think that's very healthy. And my hunch is that the only people who don't have imposter syndrome are the people who should have it. So yes. You know, I'm just guessing that Trump and our Prime Minister do not suffer from imposter syndrome, where they certainly should, you know. So I think, but I mean, it's good to hear that Val McDermott says that, because she's had scores of books, and I've just said this is my book 6. So I always suffer from imposter syndrome. I didn't write anything until I was 50. So yes, nervous, apprehensive, scared. I hope all the questions later will be gentle and positive.
Well, you just mentioned being a late starter in terms of being a writer, but running Scala Radio, you'll know that people like Brahms didn't write symphonies until their 40s. Vaughan Williams was a late starter in terms of what. So there's nothing wrong with being a late starter, is there?
No, there is always encouragement to be found. And hey, you know, it was thrilling to start something new when you get to your 50s. It was the most visceral experience I'd ever had at work. There was a scene in the first Itch book where I was sitting writing it, and my heart was beating faster because of the scene that I was writing. And I thought, this is ludicrous. I'm getting excited about a scene that I'm writing because I'm scared about what's going to happen. And it's my story. I mean, this is, anyway, so I reflected on that quite a lot. And thinking, well, there's something about the mechanics and the organic nature of a book, which if you're in a scene that's working well, can be quite thrilling to write and hopefully thrilling to read. Sometimes it's like running uphill with a backpack on, but other times it's more exciting than that.
You mentioned the young adult books, and in your piece that I interviewed you for the Eye, you said, in the books I write for children, the lead character is very much a boy who doesn't fit in. And then you said, when my eldest read it, he said, "Dad, this is about you."
Yeah.
I don't think I'd realized that. He was probably right. So there is that time where you felt you didn't fit in. You can't feel that now, surely, Simon.
No, I always think that. No, I always think that, and always have done. And I think it's a mindset, really. I think it's a personality type. There is the person that imagine you're in a party. The room is full. I mean, this is an ancient illustration because no one's in a full room anymore. But you were invited to a party. It's a full attendance is absolutely rammed. There are some people who can work the room and feel very happy at doing that. I do not feel like that, and I feel as though I would be very happy just sitting in a corner and reading a book. I didn't feel as I mean maybe it comes back because we moved a lot as a family, and so I was going to new schools a lot. So maybe it comes from that, but it served me quite well, I think, in terms of writing, because an awful lot of fiction, it seems to me, seems to center around characters who don't fit in, who aren't the center of attention at school. It's the person on the outside. But when I was at Radio 1, I felt like, even though I was doing the breakfast show, I felt a bit of an outsider. At 5 Live, I felt a bit of an outsider. So I think it's a mindset. It's nothing to do with the people who you're working with. It's just the way someone is, I think.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I've interviewed a hell of a lot of people over the years. I did for the last book, British Crime Writing, and I found a tactic that you're very good at, which is knowing when to shut up when you're interviewing someone, because you're there just as a handmaiden when you're interviewing someone. They're the one that the audience wants to hear, like tonight, right?
Yeah, I'm far happier asking questions than answering them, Barry. So, and I do think that the well-honed question is a thing to aspire to, a thing to marvel, and when it happens, it can produce fantastic results. And often those questions are short questions. We've all listened to interviews where, particularly on political programs, where the interviewer is basically in the question showing off how much she or he knows by putting lots of information in every single possible section of the question. By the time you've got to the end of the question, the person you're interviewing has had plenty of time to work out an answer. Whereas I think that I was always a fan of Larry King on CNN, who would, in his political interviews, would say things like, "Tell me more about that. I don't quite understand that point you just made. Explain it." They were great. I mean, they're basic questions, but they were very, very effective. So, and and the modern chat show has developed into a place where that isn't the case. The modern chat show, and they're very funny and very entertaining, but they're all about the host, really, as opposed to the people who come on it.
Yes, you'd never watch Graham Norton entertaining though he is to learn anything about the people he's interviewing, because they'll come on and do their shtick, and it's not like the days of Michael Parkinson, who would sit back and listen.
I think that's true. And Parky was a journalist. I love Graham Norton's show. I think it's terrific, but it's an entertainment show. That's what it is. And Graham does his work and everything. And there are other people that I would look at and think, I'm not sure we're learning anything here. And Graham's great thing is that he sits on a sofa almost as big as the one I'm sitting on, and gets the guests to talk to each other, and they all come on at the same time. So I really, really like that. But you're right about the interview question. You know, you have to think on behalf of the audience, you know, and it's because you're there on their behalf.
Do you ever watch with horror, Simon, or with Schadenfreude, or both, the famous sort of disasters in that field, such as Harold Wilson's short talk show? I don't know if you've ever seen that, which is a famous debacle, or Russell Harty being hit by who was it?
Grace Jones, I think.
Grace Jones, because he turns his back. He doesn't turn his back, but he starts to ask somebody else a question, and she feels neglected. What do you feel when you watch clips like that?
Yeah, I've read about the Harold Wilson. I haven't seen it. I do remember the Grace Jones. I just think, you know, there, but for the grace of God, go I. I mean, pretty much all of my interviews have been on the radio. And sometimes you can do your work, do all the prep, and it's still a catastrophe because the person you're interviewing doesn't want to do it. You know, Steven Seagal, I did, dreadful, shocking interview. I interviewed Frank Sinatra's son, Frank Sinatra Jr., terrible, awful interview, which I should have, you know, curtailed before we were halfway through. And it's just because they don't want to deliver, you know. So sometimes it's your fault and sometimes it isn't.
Isn't it a question of, like with Michael Parkinson, who we just talked about, when he says to Meg Ryan, if you had an interview like going like this, what would you do? And she says, end it. And he says, thank you, Meg Ryan, which I think is a wonderful moment.
The thing is, I've been in love with Meg Ryan for many years. And I only got to interview her once and it went fine.
You didn't have the problems then that Michael Parkinson had?
No, but mine was a radio interview and not a TV interview. So she was very well behaved for me.
Right. Before we get on to the book, just a couple of quick questions about Radio 2. You said at one point, being a Radio 1 presenter was all I'd ever wanted to do.
Yeah.
But then you talked about the nasty and backstabbing aspects of it.
What at Radio 1?
Yeah. And
well, yeah. I mean, I mean, Radio 1 in the 80s had calmed down a bit from the 70s, but it was still full of very, very large and important and significant broadcasters. It was, no, you know, it was fantastic. I had a wonderful time. That would be wrong to characterize it in that way. But I obviously, when you were working on a radio station that was as big as Radio 1, you know, there are a lot of egos involved, you know, mine included. So I think it was always to be expected that there would be a little bit of jostling, a little bit of, oh, really? Have you heard what he said? Really? Okay, chat. Because it was a big, you know, it was a big deal. But it would be wrong to characterize it as bitchy, because I you know, it was all I'd ever aspired to do, and there I was doing it. So you know, for the most part, it was great.
We can't move on to Knife Edge without talking about the drive time business. Was that a depressing time for you, or were you able to switch off from the fact that the nation was talking about it?
I think you'll find that we can talk about Knife Edge without talking about the events which I just tend to refer to as 2018.
Right.
So and 2018 was actually, I mean, I'm not really crowbarring this in, but this is where this started. And when I was on the promo tour for Mad Blood Stirring, I was just beginning to write, write Knife Edge and trying to prepare it. So it was written from a place of angst, and I think, you know, look, I mean, all the players have had their say. I think it was not a lot of fun to be at the middle of such a storm, and I think people have acknowledged that mistakes were made, but we moved on, you know. So marriages fall apart, relationships fall apart, and you know, and we moved on. But if you could, the connection to Knife Edge is that in the early draft, Barry, this was inspired by Lee Child's first book. The first draft, some of the names were different. In Lee Child's first book, he took revenge on the people who'd sacked him from Granada, and all the bad characters in I think it's in that book. Mm. He took revenge on them stylistically, and they came a cropper. So it's fair to say that in the early stages of Knife Edge, the names of some of the protagonists and some of the bad people were not the same as they are now. So I choose to reflect on it that way.
That's probably sensible, because Peter James, he won't mind my saying this because he's admitted it publicly, had a bust-up with Martin Amis, who appears under a pseudonym in the worst possible terms in several of his books. Is it right for an author to be paying off scores in their fiction?
Yeah, it is.
That's fair enough. So with Knife Edge, you chose Famie Madden, the heroine. So she's a female investigative journalist. She's in the firing line when a series of coordinated attacks, 7 members of the investigations team at the news agency where she works are murdered. She's on a mission to find out which terrorist group is behind the murders. So why did you pick a female protagonist for the book?
Yes, so there are 2 central characters to Knife Edge. One we can talk about and one we can't. Famie is the one that we can. So Famie Madden is 40-something journalist. She's a bit fed up with working at this news agency. She's fed up with this senseless reorganization and the cuts and everything. Just pushed her a bit to the edge. And Famie came about because I always knew that there would be 2 central characters to Knife Edge. Originally, it was the other way around, and it was going to be a male journalist and the other character was going to be female. But at the suggestion of my very wise agent, he said, I think we've seen that done before. Why don't we flip it? And so, and it was the suggestion of my editor that we said it not in a TV newsroom, but in a news agency. So Famie works for a news agency like Bloomberg or Reuters. And it's her job to, in this shift where we joined the book at the beginning, it's her job to taste all the stories that are coming in on the wires and on the televisions that she can watch, decide which are the right stories and the correct stories for the agency to snap onto the wires. And so that's what she's doing. She's sifting the stories. And so she arrives about 6, 7 o'clock for the first shift. And on page 1 of the book, there are 7 murders. And as the news comes in of this particularly bloody rush hour, she starts to realize there's obviously a big event happening. And then she starts to realize as the pictures come in that she knows who the 7 people are. That in fact, that they sit next to her and they are the agency's investigations team. So Famie decides to go to all 7 funerals. She quits her job because she's had enough. And the level of threat and danger just tips her over the edge. She decides to go to all 7 funerals. And then at the end of the 7th funeral, there is a note put under the windscreen wiper of her car. It's typewritten, old-fashioned typewriter. And it says, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows." She's slightly too young to remember that that's a Bob Dylan lyric, but she quickly discovers that. Anyway, she realizes that someone is trying to send her messages, and she doesn't know whether she's going to be targeted as the next victim or whether someone is trying to help her out. And so the rest of the book is that really, is Famie Madden trying to work out what happened to her colleagues and how much danger she's in.
You really get under her skin, and she's a fantastically rounded, well-written character. I wonder if you thought about the fact that a lot of people are taking stick at the moment because they're trying to write outside their own experience. So you are only supposed to now, it would seem, write about something which is in your immediate, in other words, men shouldn't write female characters, actors who are not disabled shouldn't play disabled characters. So you wouldn't have My Left Foot with Daniel Day-Lewis, for instance, because he's not disabled. Was there any thought that you should be having a male journalist in the current climate where you have to stay within your own comfort zone?
As far as that is a very nuanced and balanced conversation, but the acting thing to one side, my starting point from a writing point of view is that every author can write any character that she or he chooses, period. That's it. it might be that there are some characters that they have to work harder at. It might be that there are some characters that they'd be unwise to try. But it's impossible to go anywhere in a novel other than to say, as an author, you can write any character that you want. That has to be the starting position. The fourth book I wrote, which is called Blame, the lead character was a 16-year-old biracial girl with a Haitian mother and an English father who's in prison. I fit none of those categories, and I would strongly support the rights of any author just to write any character that they want. It does mean that they have to do it well, you know, but God forbid that we ever end up with an author thinking, well, I'm a middle-class guy, I can only write about middle-class guys. I mean, it's utter cobblers, utter cobblers.
I must confess, well, when I read about Spielberg's new version of West Side Story, in which the Puerto Ricans have to be played by actors who are Puerto Rican, I wondered how far that goes, because Tony is a Polish American. Therefore,
Yeah.
it can only be played by a Polish American actor. It's hiding.
Sure. I mean, I think when it comes to casting plays and casting movies, I'm not really expert in that and have had no experience. I'm just thinking from the author's point of view. If I wanted to, I mean, my iPad that I'm talking to you on, Barry, is balanced on a table. If I want to write a book from the point of view of a table, and other authors have done that, I can do that. As long as I do it well, you'll hopefully enjoy a book in which the central character is a table or an insect or a garden. I don't know. But as soon as we, you know, when Mallory Blackman was writing Noughts and Crosses, did anyone object to the fact that she was writing all kinds of characters from all over the place?
Yes. Yeah. But things have changed so much, Simon. If you look, there's a writer, very good American writer called Bill Beverly, who wrote a book called Dodgers that won just about every possible prize. If that book came out now, that book about the Black experience is written by a middle-aged white male author.
Yeah.
He would take stick for that in a way that nowadays he didn't do, even as far a year ago.
Okay. Well, all I would chip in, and as I mentioned, I've only written 6 books, but my last book, Mad Blood Stirring, was set in Dartmoor Prison in 1814 and 1815, and is set in a prison of 6,000 American sailors, most of whom are Black. And I did think, okay, well, here's an interesting story. It's a true story. Who has the right to tell that story? This is a British prison with British guards. There are lots of white American sailors, there are lots of Black American sailors, but it's an English story set in Dartmoor Prison full of Americans. I don't know who has the right to tell that story. And it just, the more I thought about it, the more ludicrous the whole concept became. So I sweated, for Mad Blood, I was writing characters who, because the majority of the American Navy at that time, the Black sailors were escaped slaves, they were emancipated slaves. Some of them had been freed for many generations. And they spoke with a variety of accents. They had a variety of experiences. How on earth does a middle-class kid from London come anywhere close to doing that? Well, the answer is you work hard, you do your prep, and hopefully your imagination is strong enough to come up with believable characters. And it was published in the States and it got good reviews in New York Times and so on. So, and no one complained. So I just think it's worth saying that as long as you do your work and as long as you give it your best, the basic starting point has to be any author can write any character at all. Mm. And then the pressure is, if you're going to write outside your experience, and let's hope that you do, God help us if we only write within our experience, then you just have to work extra hard to make sure that it's absolutely brilliant.
It's interesting. There's one area that Fahmy Madden is unlike you. Now, you and I, Simon, are the kind of journalists who spend our time talking about our enthusiasms and communicating them, and we spend some of our time drawing people out. Now, Fahmy is an investigative journalism, which always strikes me that is real journalism. Is what we do real journalism, Simon?
I don't even think I'm a journalist. You were talking about imposter syndrome. I when I was at 5 Live for 8-9 years, I felt an imposter the whole time. When I was there, when I had conversations with, for example, John Simpson during the various conflicts that were there during the Iraq War, you might be in the middle of a sports conversation or a movie conversation, but if John Simpson came up, you went straight to it. You went to him because he was in danger. So you say, John Simpson's, we'll come back. John Simpson's on the line. John, what can you tell us? And so he would tell you what you could see. And then you'd ask a couple of hopefully intelligent questions, and then the line would go, and then you'd move on. Now, if you spend your time with people like that, who are living it on the front line, then you know that what you're doing is something else altogether. And I don't think of myself as a journalist. I think of myself as a writer and a broadcaster, and who stumbles upon stories and tries to tell them. And that's it. But I don't think what I do is journalism.
Well, I disagree with that. I think you're pretty damn good, but
that's very kind.
Would you feel that you've now moved into this world? But you've written a few books, but now you're moving to the world of the crime fiction writing community. So far, have you found them welcoming?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, who knows what anyone says when the door is shut. But I have only received welcome and positivity from everybody. And I think that is partly because the community is very welcoming anyway. But also, I mean, when I started writing the Itch books, I think a lot of people thought that I wasn't writing my own books. And then I think obviously they realized that it was, I've written every single word. Once they realize that you're not a charlatan, and once they realize that you're in it for real, and once they realize that you're trying to do it properly, I think everyone is fantastically welcoming, and I've received nothing other than positivity. Because here's the thing, Barry, more broadly, writers, publishers, agents, everyone has to fight really hard to get this right. The media is to get your book noticed, to get your publisher noticed, to get your journalism noticed is a tough business. And there's an extent to which we are all on the same side. We will benefit. I will benefit from a prosperous crime fiction industry. I will, even though I'm not in HarperCollins, for example. If HarperCollins do well, that's a great thing. So I do feel it's the same in radio. Although you have competitors, although I'd like to do better than this person, and for your journalism, you would like to write better than that person. Ultimately, we are all, to use an overly used and diminished phrase, we are all in this together, and we do have to fight for libraries. We have to fight for bookshops. We're all in this together.
Yes. Did you feel though that, for instance, Richard Osman is very frank about the fact that when his book was published, he knew that a lot of people would say, well, he's a popular celebrity, he's known for his broadcasts. That gives him an advantage over somebody who's just written a novel. Did you fear that might happen to you because people like you as a broadcaster?
When I had my first meeting at Penguin Random House Children's, who published the Itch books, I said to them that I wanted to write under a pseudonym. And they tolerated this opinion for all of about 30 seconds and then told me that I was an idiot. So that went well. The first Itch book was sold to America. And when that deal was done, I was so pleased because in America, obviously, no one knows who I am, but it just sold on the strength of the story. So I think that the celebrity author is a useful phrase. It's a useful kind of catch-all phrase. But in the concept of celebrity author, there are celebrities who don't write their books, and there are celebrities who do. And I think as soon as people realised that I was doing it for real, things calmed down. I mean, certainly it helped me get an agent, but the only reason that I wrote the Itch books was I wrote the first one for my son who was 10. at the time. I wrote it for him. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have a publisher. I wrote the thing on my iPad. I printed it out on the printer. I had to go to Smith's to get another 400 pages because I'd run out of paper. And I just gave him the thing to read, and he read it and he liked it, and it all happened from there. So I guess I can imagine if you're a hardworking writer who hasn't got an industry profile, that it's enormously frustrating when people like me come along. But
I suppose the difference would be for someone like you, I would guess that when someone like Katie Price writes a book, she makes very little secret of the fact that she hasn't written them, unless she claims to have an input in.
Yes.
I think people would assume that you have probably written the books that your name is on.
Yeah, well, hopefully people thought that, because it's certainly true. And the idea that anyone else, what's the point of getting someone else to write it? I mean, I genuinely, have no idea. But I think the same is true in radio, for example. There was a time when the only way you could succeed in radio was through local radio, whether it be commercial radio or BBC local radio, and then someone will go, let's try them, and then, which is the way I got promoted. Now the way that you get on the radio is you're a comedian, or you're an actor, or you have a TV profile. Very few people go through the kind of local radio way that used to be the case. So you can either respond to that by being bitter and resentful, and let's face it, who hasn't? Or you can just go, well, actually, there's a changing media here, and there are other ways to succeed, and there are other ways of finding talent. So you either go with the flow or you go under, Barry. That's it.
Well, you just said something, and you said changing media. Here we are talking online, and the whole business of promoting and selling books has changed because of the pestilence.
Yes.
Are you a little annoyed that your book has appeared when you can't meet and press the flesh with people?
Yes, I mean, one of the things, writing a book is quite a lonely experience, because it is just you in the corner of a room somewhere writing a book and trying to come up with something that people will like. And one of the things that I look forward to doing is doing public events and meeting readers, and sitting at a table, people come along, if you're fortunate, and then they buy your book and you write them a message and you pose for a photograph. That's what it's all about. That's what I want to do. But I think that's gone, until we get a vaccine, so at least we can still write, at least you can still buy a book, at least we can still talk about books. But I used to love traveling the country, speaking in village halls, in tents, in temperance buildings, wherever it was that you ended up, and just talking about the book, meeting readers. They've got a few things to say, and and that's terrific. And then they say, that thing that you wrote a few years ago, and you go, I can't remember at all. But it matters, and meeting readers is just fantastic. So it's very, on the one hand, it's very nice. I'm sitting in this room here. I had a swim in the North Sea about an hour ago.
Don't rub it in. You people who can swim in the North Sea, we're feeling envious.
Well, so it has its upside, but really, I'd like to be out on the road and meeting people and traveling the country, and hopefully those days will come back. But I don't think we're there for a while.
What about your family? I remember one of my earliest interviews as a fresh-faced young journalist was with Auburn War, and you told me how once a week the children would be ushered into Evelyn Moore's studio, and he said, my father's hands never really left the keyboard, as if to show this is my real work. And then the nanny would take us out. And I said, oh, that's terrible. That's almost like child abuse. And he said, no, that's what we expected as the children of a writer to be. So do your kids have access to you when you're writing, or do they just see you once a week on Wednesday morning?
No, it's not like that. I guess if you're a full-time writer, then things would be different. But the family comes first, and I've always, I do. It is true that you write with the door shut, and there are times when you don't need to be disturbed. That's certainly true. But I would tend, because of the pattern of the day, I used to write in the morning and then go and do the radio in the afternoon. Now it's the other way around. But no, you're there and you're present. You're there every day. And what a terrible, awful, ghastly world that is that you just described, where the importance of the writer, heaven help us from self-important, deluded people like that. No, you know, do the proper thing, do the real thing. You know, talk to your kids. That's the best thing. Also, it's very useful because if you're writing kids fiction, as I was, and who knows, maybe we'll go back to doing. Listen to people. Listen. That's the job of the writer. Mm. Listen to the way they talk. Listen to their rhythms of speech. Listen to their manner. Listen to their inflection, because it's different to the way you spoke when you were younger. So, you know, there's work that can be done as well.
You talked about, and we've just been talking about, a kind of snobbery. Now, you said to me that you'd read every single book which won the Man Booker Prize from 2000 to 2009 when you were a judge on the Golden Man Booker. So do you think that there is still a wall between serious literary fiction and popular fiction of the kind you write?
The honest answer to that is if I'm honest, Barry, the first words that popped into my head when you asked that question was, "Who cares?" You know, it's not some, you know, some people might worry about it. Some people might be concerned about it. I think and I know that literary fiction is struggling, but all I can say is if you've got a cracking good story, well, you know, where does Hilary Mantel fit into that? She just writes great stories. I mean, it's literary fiction, it's popular fiction. Where does Philip Pullman fit into that? It's brilliantly written, it's popular fiction, it's children's fiction, or is it children's fiction? You know, so greatness will out is what I'd say. And there are artificial barriers which we put up, some of which are helpful. So if you go into a bookshop, it's useful. Too much champagne. If you go to a bookshop, it's useful to know that it's children's over there, YA there, grown-ups there, non-fiction there, and so on. But I don't think the reader thinks in terms of literary fiction, non-literary fiction. They just want a cracking story.
You mentioned Philip Pullman, and you'd said to me when I interviewed you for The Eye that you were looking forward to the as yet untitled final book in Philip Pullman's current trilogy. Is he your go-to guy for good children's writing, if we call it children's writing?
Oh, well, yeah, well, that's the question. Is it children's writing? It isn't. In my opinion, it isn't. It just so happens that the lead characters are children. That doesn't make it children's fiction. You know, what makes YA fiction? Well, the lead character is a teenager. I mean, Romeo and Juliet, does that strike you as a YA story? I mean, it would be.
Is To Kill a Mockingbird a children's book?
You know, so again, the barriers break. As soon as you analyze the barriers, it kind of breaks down very, very quickly. So I would say Philip Pullman just is a genius and writes extraordinary stories. What was the question again, Barry? Sorry, I'm sorry.
That was kind of it. Was he kind of an inspiration for you as a writer of YA novels?
Yes, I mean, yes. Although I wouldn't even begin to put myself anywhere close to what he did. I think Anthony Horowitz and Patrick Ness wrote the books, and of course J.K. Rowling wrote the books that were inspirational when you're trying to work out how do you tell a story to young people. Also, I would like to wave a flag for a very unfashionable writer whose works they don't really read very well anymore. But when I was a kid, I read the Willard Price books, and he wrote everything was adventure: Amazon adventure, underwater adventure, volcano adventure, about two brothers who go around the world essentially stealing animals and taking them to their father's zoo. It doesn't really hold up very well to the 21st century. But they were cracking novels, and that, you know, that sense of that page-turning excitement and can't wait to get the next book. For me, Willard Price started that.
Well, you were talking about the fact that the Willard Price, you say, quite a lot of what he wrote wouldn't play today. What about writers like Graham Greene, Simenon, John Buchan? I'm trying to think of other writers, Dennis Wheatley, where you'll find a strain of anti-Semitism. Simenon.
Yes.
Does it matter as a reader? Can you screen out mentally those aspects of the books?
This is a very personal judgment. Roald Dahl was a fierce anti-Semite, does that stop you enjoying the BFG or the Twits? Well, for some people it will. You know, for some people, knowing the way he talked about Jews would have been disturbing enough for them to think, actually, I don't want to read this stuff. This is a very contemporary conversation, really. You know, when if a writer or a politician or a historian or anyone holds views which you consider to be objectionable, in what way does that impact your view on their art? You know, Eric Gill, for example.
Exactly. You mentioned Eric Gill. As a boy, I would go to the Liverpool Philharmonic and see those fantastic murals. Now I know about him and his daughters. Does it make my experience of those murals, is it tarnished because he was not a nice guy?
You know, and, you know, Caravaggio was a murderer. So, you know, this has been a debate that's been going on for a long time. And I think it is ultimately down to each individual at the end that you will either find the anti-Semitism of the author vile enough for you to not want to read their work, or you'll be able to cope with it. I don't think it's down to anyone to tell you how to react, really.
Well, on that, there was a piece by Julian Barnes in which he said, a growing number of UK universities have introduced trigger warnings to notify students of potentially distressing material and provide safe spaces in which certain behaviours or language are prohibited. Should your books have trigger warnings?
Well, the only trigger warning necessary for this was I had to ring my mother for the second book on the trot and explain to her that there would be language that would be considered unacceptable. For Mad Blood Stirring, it was, I said that, you know, in the early 19th century, how do you think sailors spoke to each other? And for this, my defense is the fact that journalists swear a lot. So the world of trigger warnings is not a world that I'm a part of. I don't think there is anything, all I would say is, hopefully it's a tense thriller. You know, hopefully there are bits where you go, oh, hopefully there are bits that you go, ah, and hopefully the whole experience is, you know, is thrilling. So I don't think there's a, you know, the world of crime fiction is not one that is going to be taking to trigger warnings anytime soon, I don't think.
Well, there is a Staunch Prize. Have you heard about that, Simon?
Oh, what prize?
The Staunch Prize, which is a prize for a novel which has no sexual exploitation of women in whatsoever. Val McDermid has strongly spoken out against this, saying, why should whole areas of experience be closed off to a writer?
Well, that's funny. I'm just going to put the lights on because I look a lot more gloomy than you do. So I'm just going to...
I'll keep talking while you're there. And I'll also ask Cheryl, while I'm assuming is listening to us, is she's getting her questions ready, because in a few minutes' time we'll check out any questions. You and I, Simon, when we grew up, you look much brighter now. We were not protected from anything, and we're better people for it. As a parent, do you think kids today are slightly over-cosseted?
Well, you're trying to tempt me into all kinds of
that's
areas.
My job.
I don't think kids are cosseted. I think they're exposed to stuff now, which is the opposite. You know, I think they see and read and experience more than we ever thought we'd get to see in a lifetime. Whether that's a good thing or not, I absolutely don't know. I mean, I have no problem with, you know, certification in movies is a good thing. For me as a parent, I would like to know if a film is a PG or a 12 or a 15 or an 18. I think that's, it's not saying you can't go, but I think it's just saying, I mean, the PG category in cinema is notoriously difficult. But I think as a parent, it's really useful to know that you might want to just check this out. The BBFC website and app has loads of information that says, okay, here's the general idea of the story. It has elements of threat, and this is where it's threatening. There you go. The information is out there. So if there's a degree of if that leaks elsewhere, then I don't have a problem with that. But trigger warnings seem to me something that we don't need to go anywhere near, Barry. It's not a healthy thing for us.
When you were writing your crime fiction, Simon, who were the writers who got your creative juices flowing? Who inspired you?
Well, I can make up an answer, Barry, which would be dishonest of me, or I can tell you the truth. And the truth of the matter is, really, it boils down to Lee Child. And I find his direct way of writing, his clinical style, I found that to be very inspirational. There is a character in this book, in Mad Blood, who is referred to for most of the book as the student. And at the time I was writing it, there was a Lee Child book that I had, and there's a character who he referred to as the American. We didn't need to know anything more about it. He was just the American. Later on, we find out who the American is, and later on, we find out who the student is. So I mean, I would say that really Lee was the main inspiration in the kind of writing style. He's got nothing to do with the story, even though the story has a strong Coventry connection, as does he. But I would probably leave it. I would probably just point everything at him.
So you weren't going to? Were you going to say to me Dostoevsky or Proust, and then you thought you'd be honest?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, you get to the point where you just think, "What the hell? Let's not pretend. Let's not pretend that I've been a student of crime fiction all my life, which I haven't. I thought of a story and I thought I'd write it, and hopefully people will like it, and that's about it, Barry.
Do you think it matters? Do you think this is an age thing that you're more concerned when you're younger about how you're being received by people? As the years roll on, you're prepared to say, "What the hell? This is me."
Well, I sincerely hope so. Yeah, absolutely. You kind of, I don't, I think all opinions have been formed about what you do, about my writing, about my radio. If people like it, they like it, and if they don't, they don't. And I can't. If you read the book, Barry, and you liked it, which is great. But if you didn't like it, I can't persuade you to like it. You've come up with a judgment where, of your own. So I'm quite happy to let it roll at that, really.
I've got 100 more questions, but I'm asking now Cheryl, who will shortly be letting me see any questions she's received. Final question for you before I turn things over to Cheryl, who's just appeared on the screen. Hello, Cheryl.
Hello.
Do you think, Simon, that if I'm doing this interview with you in 10 years' time, when we're both on our Zimmer frames, will radio be a thing of the past? Will Scala Radio be a distant memory, and you'll just be the new Lee Child?
Well, the good news is that I think radio is here to stay. I'm absolutely convinced about that. The need for audio entertainment. I mean, if you look at the world of podcasts, which is perceived, which is new and cool, and everyone has their own podcast. Everyone is making podcasts, and they're great. It's radio. It's audio entertainment. It's even more personal than a radio program is. So I think who knows how media will change over the years, but the need for radio and a good podcast is just good radio in a condensed and concentrated form. I think it's going to be here to stay. So I have absolutely no fear. I mean, I shall shuttle off this mortal coil long before there's any threat to radio. I think radio is in a very healthy place.
That was slightly a politician's answer, Simon, because I actually asked you whether you'd be giving up radio in order just to write.
I see what you mean. I will not avoid the question. I had thought that I would do less radio and more writing. I did think that was a possibility. But I think the truth of the matter is that at the moment, radio is in a very strong position, and books and theatre and cinema and all that is slightly more difficult to predict. Mm-hmm. So I think I will carry on doing a mix of radio and writing for the foreseeable future. I just started, even though I'm doing too many radio programs, I've just taken on another one, which I'm going to start in September. So I'll be on the air every day, which is just ludicrous. So for the moment, I'm going to carry on doing both. But I did think that I would do less radio and more writing. I'd like to do less radio and more writing, but
Right. Okay.
I guess a lot depends on what happens to this book, Barry. If everyone buys it, then I can do less radio.
Well, you heard it here. Buy the book and you write more. So, Cheryl, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. Okay. It seems a shame to break you two up, actually. You're doing so well.
That's all right.
Great. So, from Nigel, Simon, you've met many famous people in your life, some perhaps more interesting than others. Are any of the personalities written into any of the characters in your books?
Oh, okay. That question took an unusual turn. I would say no. I don't think so. I mean, it's certainly, the first part is factually true. I have met many interesting and intriguing people. I don't think any of them have made it into the books. That's very interesting. I mean, I think some characters are composite characters of teachers who you've worked with or bosses who you've worked with, but I don't think there's I shall probably wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and think, yes, that's right, there is, of course, that character was, I think. But as far as I can think of at the moment, there are no famous people in there.
Okay.
In fact, two writers have had to pulp entire runs of their book, John le Carré and Jilly Cooper, when people identified themselves in the books and said, that's me, and succeeded in getting the whole first print run pulped. So there's a danger.
Yes. Oh, okay. Well, that's not going to happen here. I mean, I think Famie was inspired by a journalist who I worked with when I was at 5 Live, who sadly is no longer with us. But she was arch and difficult and brilliant and very intellectual. And when I was trying to get to grips with the character of who Famie was, Nita, who was this journalist, she was sort of like the beginning. She was like the inspiration for that. But I'm not expecting to have to pulp anything.
Right. Back to you, Cheryl.
Okay, well, Polly, who says this is a brilliant talk, she's really enjoying it. Says,
Well, Polly.
Polly, yeah, good. Yeah, Polly says, I wondered if you could enter into any world or setting created by an author. Which one would if you could enter into any world or setting created by an author, which one would you choose and why? Thank you.
I mean, I think most of the worlds that are created by authors, you would not want to go anywhere near. You know, the idea of being stuck in someone else's world is truly horrific. I would. What springs to mind? Well, I mean, we mentioned Philip Pullman. I do, and I know he worked very hard at. That sounds like a criticism, which it wasn't. But I know he was well. He had read a lot about the multiverse theory before he went anywhere near writing his Dark Materials. And the idea of cutting from one world into another, I think, is quite intriguing. I guess I would like to have been a kid at Hogwarts, the way a lot of people would have done, or maybe a teacher at Hogwarts. I think I would have been quite a good defense against the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts. But in general, I think most of the worlds that are created by authors, you don't think, oh, wouldn't it be nice to be a part of that? I don't think I've ever thought that anyway.
Wouldn't you like to be living, Simon, in Agatha Christie's St. Mary Mead, little English village with warm beer and cricket matches?
How do you know I'm not? I'm
North Sea.
Yeah, I'm in Suffolk, Barry. It's quite close to that.
Okay. I would imagine you'd find that a bit stultifying, a cozy village where everybody knows what everybody else is doing.
Yeah. I'm a city kid, really. I'm a London boy. I think I would find that quite difficult. So yeah, that doesn't really appeal very much.
Cheryl?
Okay, well, this is a question from me. I mean, what gave you the impetus to change from writing for children or YA books to adults? Why did you do that?
Well, there was never any plan, I have to say. It was never. I stumbled into all of this. I stumbled into writing in the first place. Certainly stumbled into writing for kids. And what they are, Cheryl, is it's just, I think of a story and then think, where is this going to fit? So we've talked a bit already about kids' books with kids as the main characters. I really don't think His Dark Materials is kids' fiction just because the main characters are children. There was a debate that I had with the publisher about Mad Blood Stirring. The two main characters in that book, one is 16 and one is 17. And there was a suggestion that it should be a YA title, to which I argued that when you were 16 or 17 in the early 19th century, you basically were a boy or a man, you were a girl or you're a woman. The idea of teenagers just didn't exist. So, and the characters had spent the last few years trying to kill each other, you know, so it didn't really feel YA-ish to me. And Knife Edge is a grown-up book just because it felt as though it was. And if the next idea that I think of is going to work best as a YA piece or a children's piece, then I'll write it as that. You know, I think I probably owe it to Transworld and Penguin, my publishers, to stick with the same genre, because otherwise it gets confusing. So this is a contemporary thriller. My next book will be a contemporary thriller. But it's all the same. I do think of it. I understand the way bookshops are arranged, and I understand the way, because it's useful and it's consumer friendly. But from an author's point of view, I think of the first three Itch books as thrillers. Blame, the YA book, that was a thriller. Mad Blood, maybe less so, but essentially this is another thriller. It just happens to be a contemporary adult thriller.
Mm. And have there been any interest in films for any of your books? You know, any film interest or TV?
Well, Itch has been filmed in Australia, and it's going to be, instead of Cornwall, it's set in Albany in Western Australia, which is very frustrating because the BBC turned it down. So ABC picked it up, filmed it in Albany, and now the BBC have bought it and it's going to be shown on the BBC this autumn. They are hoping to start filming of the second story in October, because Western Australia is relatively COVID-free, so it hasn't got the issues that Melbourne has. Mad Blood Stirring, there is a fantastic script written by Jack Thorne, which I've read, which is amazing, and discussions continue with directors and so on. But I have to say, you know, I mean, so that's ongoing, but the whole world of making films and making television it's a bit up in the air, you know, and making those shows is complicated.
Sure. I just wondered about the rights being brought up, or because sometimes they buy the rights and then it takes a while to actually deliver the film, doesn't it?
Sure. Well, the rights to Itch have gone. The rights to Mad Blood have gone. As far as I know, if anyone wants to get hold of the rights to Knife Blood, they're still available at a very reasonable rate.
What do you think, Simon, that one thing that gets YA authors into trouble is their treatment of sex? So Melvin Burgess had a lot of criticism for having
yes.
Is that an area that you've ever had any problems with?
No.
Right.
No,
it's
not.
From Graham.
Yeah, go ahead.
He's saying, if you're sitting with a blank page and nothing is happening, how disciplined are you to make something happen?
Well, I certainly relate to that, and I'm not a very fast writer. I have never suffered from the kind of writer's block in terms of not knowing what to write, but I interviewed an author many years ago called Robert Schuthaler. He wrote a book called The Tobacconist, and it was basically a book about the Anschluss, about the Nazi takeover of Austria, but it was written from the point of view of a kid who was working in a tobacconist. And he said to me in an interview that he said, I'm a working class boy. I found words difficult. And sometimes I sit in front of a computer for an hour and I just write one sentence. And I said to him, you've given a lot of people a lot of encouragement, because people have this image of writers churning out thousands of words. And I know people can do that, but I find it quite difficult. So the blank page thing, I just think if in doubt, just write something. It might be, it might be nonsense and you might get rid of it later. But I try and plan a little bit so that if there's a scene I'm trying to write at the moment, for example, in a new book, and I've been trying to write the same scene for 2 weeks. So I'm trying to construct it in my head and then come up with a few lines and then go back and write them. So I live with a scene for quite a long time in my head before I write it. And I think that's probably how I avoid the completely blank page problem.
You've got one of the best editors in the business that you work with at Transworld. Does he ever have to gently nudge you, Simon, and say, how's that chapter coming?
He doesn't have to nudge me in terms of getting on with it, because I get on with it fine. But my editor is this guy called Bill Scott Carr, and he's terrific. But the best piece of advice that I had from him, I'll just give this to to people watching, to let you know what it's like having an editor. I mean, part of it is like having a teacher. You write your homework, you hand it in, it gets marked, it comes back. But I was, when Transworld had just said they would publish Mad Blood Stirring, I explained to Bill what the idea was and how I was going to write it. And I'd written nothing at this stage. And he said, it sounds a bit nice, Simon. And then I thought, okay, that's quite interesting. And then the other thing he said was that there's a character in Mad Blood who is called Elizabeth Shortland, who's the wife of the governor of the prison, Thomas Shortland, who is a real person. And she was a bit in the background. And I didn't feel the need to have a prominent woman character in the book because it's a men's prison. And I didn't want to shoehorn in a female character just because it needed one. But Bill said, I'm interested in Elizabeth Shortland. Let's find out more about her. And basically from that one meeting, and he hadn't read anything, Elizabeth Shortland came from a background character to one of the point of view characters. And the book became a lot less nice. So that's how an editor works. And when they make comments, they're usually right. Damn them.
Couple of questions, actually. One from Nigel saying, would you consider a follow-up to Mad Blood? The ending suggested that you might be leading up to a sequel.
Well, it has occurred to me, and it would be nice to revisit some of those characters, and certainly there is room for that. So I have got a draft of an idea maybe for a follow-up to Mad Blood. But I always have ideas. When I finish a book, I always have ideas for how to write the next one. And then I think of another idea and I go and write that. So yes, there is a possibility of a follow-up, but we'll have to wait and see.
And another question from Andrew saying, do you write longhand or sort of on a computer?
On a computer, always. Yeah, no, I've never written anything. Most of my research notes are longhand, but everything is on a laptop or an iPad. And
another one from John saying, do you have a particular place to write, a bolt hole to disappear to? Do you write in silence or with music?
Okay, the last bit is easier. I write in silence. I used to kid myself that I could write with music, instrumental sometimes, choral sometimes, non-English sometimes. But actually, there is something about the rhythm of music which interferes with the rhythm of writing. That's ultimately where I got to. And if you're writing a nice paragraph or a decent sentence, there should be a rhythm to it. And even if you're just listening to Max Richter or something like that, excuse me, there will be a rhythm to that which I think is going to jar with what you're writing. So I write in silence rather than with music. I do have a writing room at home, but I can also write here. I could write on this sofa. I could write in the garden if I had to.
Wasn't it nice when you heard, Simon, that composers like Mahler would go to a little hut on a river and compose there? There were no interruptions, just them and the river and a hut.
Yeah, that sounds like something from another century, Barry.
It is precisely so. Any more questions, Cheryl? No, we've lost Cheryl's sound.
Oh no, I think that's it. time to thank everyone, and just to remind everyone, it's a great book published today, and it's available at the Chorleywood Bookshop, signed editions. So I know you get one included in your ticket, but it'll make a great Christmas present. And I know this is a summer's evening, but we have to think ahead and look forward in life. And yeah, what better present.
I endorse that message. There is a book. I want to finish on this, is that when we're done here, I've got a little kind of soiree planned, because it is publication day. And one of the people I think is going to turn up is someone who I think is now revered by all bookshop owners, Cheryl, because he has been responsible for not just the #1 hardback piece of fiction in the last year, but people go into bookshops and they buy 8 copies of Charlie Mackes's book. And I think Charlie's coming tonight. But he has some magic going on about him. So I'm hoping that he's going to sprinkle some of his magic with us. But people buy like 8 copies for all their friends at Christmas.
Yeah.
So I would just like to say, let's do the same. Who knows who's gonna love it?
Yes. Anyway, congratulations on this. It's great news, fantastic, well done, and thank you, Barry, for a great interview. Various comments coming through how much everyone's enjoyed this evening and what fascinating interview it was. So thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks to everyone for watching.
Simon, if I could just say, for your next book, can we book you in and you come to Chorleywood in person to the village hall there, which is obviously what you were saying you love. We love the physical events, and obviously, we're doing Zoom and it's great, but it's not quite as good as actually sort of meeting you and having our photos taken with you. And
that's very true. And if we have a vaccine, I shall definitely be there.
Okay, lovely. Look forward to it. Let's
Thank you.
So. And many congratulations. Thank you both.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Barry. Thanks to everyone for watching and for sending in questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.